Welcome to episode 60 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda Butterworth, and today we continue with the tale of the Heraclidae with the story of the Heraclidae Divide up the Peloponnesus. When the Heraclidae had in this way conquered the entire Peloponnesus, they erected 3 altars to Zeus, their ancestor on their father's side, and made offerings. Then they began to distribute the cities by lot. The first city they were to cast for was Argos, the second Lacedaemon, and the third Messene. They agreed to drop their lots into an urn filled with water, and that each was to mark his own lot with his name. Thereupon Temenus and Eurysthenes and Proclus, the twin sons of Aristodemus, cast 2 marked stones into the water. But crafty Cresphones, who wanted Messene most of all, threw in a lump of earth, which dissolved almost immediately. Now they decided that he whose stone was taken from the urn first was to have Argos, and it was the stone of Temenus. Then they cast lots for Lacedaemon, and the stone of the twin sons of Aristodemus was the one to be drawn. This made it superfluous to cast lots for the third city, and Cresphones received Messene. Hereupon they and their followers went to the 3 altars and made sacrifice to the gods, who accorded them certain strange signs. For each found an animal on his altar, and the animals were different. Those who had been allotted Argos found a toad, those who had Lacedaemon a serpent, and those who were to have Messene a fox. They pondered these signs and finally asked a seer, a native of the land, to interpret them. Those who were given a toad, he said, had best remain at home in their city, for the toad is vulnerable and has nothing to protect its goings. Those on whose altar the serpent is coiled will be great aggressors and need have no fear in crossing the borders of their country. And those who saw the fox shall avoid both passiveness and force. Their safeguard shall be shrewdness. These animals later become the emblems on the shields of the Argives, Spartans, and Messenes, and how the Heraclidae remembered Oxylus, their one-eyed guide, and granted him the kingdom of Elis in reward for the help he had given them in all the Peloponnesus, the mountain land of Arcadia, was the sole region left unconquered by the descendants of Heracles. Sparta was the only one of the 3 realms they founded on the peninsula that endured for any length of time. In Argos, Temenus married his favorite daughter, Heraclidae, to Daiphantus, another great-great-grandson of Heracles, and consulted his son-in-law on all matters of importance. Last, rumor had it that he was planning to turn over the rule to him and Heraclidae. This embittered his sons. They conspired against their father and slew him. The Argives did, indeed, recognize the eldest son as their king, but because they loved liberty and equality above all, they limited the king's power so much that he and his descendants had nothing left of the kingship but a mere title. Merope and Aepytus. Cresphones, king of Messene, was no more fortunate than his brother Temenus. He had married Merope, daughter of King Cypselus of Arcadia, and she had borne her husband many children. The youngest of these was Aepytus. Cresphones had a stately palace built for himself and his children, but he was not to enjoy his sumptuous halls for long. Since he was a friend of the common people, he favored them whenever and wherever he could. This angered the rich in his realm, and they killed him together with his sons, all but the youngest, Aepytus, whom his mother managed to hide from the murderers and had taken to Arcadia, to her father, Cypselus. In the meantime, Peloponnesus, also a descendant of Heracles, seized the throne of Messene and compelled the widow of the murdered king to become his wife. When he heard it whispered that one of the rightful heirs to the throne was still alive, he set a great price upon his head. But there was no one who wanted to gain it, or even could, and he wanted to, for there was no certainty to go by, only vague rumors, and no one knew where the boy really was. When Aepytus had grown into a youth, he secretly left his grandfather's palace, and telling no one of his purposes, set out for Messene. There he heard of the price set on his head. He whipped up his courage, and he went to the court of King Peloponnesus, where no one recognized him, not even his mother, and said in the presence of Queen Merope, "I have come, O king, to tell you that I intend to win the reward you have offered for the son of Cresphones, who is a constant danger to your throne. I know him as well as if I know my own self, and I shall deliver him into your hands." When his mother heard these words, the color left her face. Quickly she sent for an old and trusted servant who had helped her save little Aepytus, and who, for fear of the new king, was now living at a distance from the palace and the court. Him she secretly dispatched to Arcadia to guard her son from possible plots, or perhaps fetch him to Messene to lead the citizens in revolt against Peloponnesus, hated for his tyrannical rule, and ascend the throne of his father. When the old servant arrived in Arcadia, he found Cypselus and the entire palace in confusion and sorrow, for Aepytus had vanished, and no one knew what had become of him. Anxiously, the servant hastened back to Messene and told the queen what had happened, and now both had only one thought, that the stranger who had appeared before the king and offered to win the reward must have murdered Aepytus in Arcadia and brought his body to Messene. They did not waste time in mournful reflection. Peloponnesus had given the stranger a lodging in the palace, and that very night the old servant and the queen, armed with an axe, went into the room with the purpose of killing the sleeper. The youth did not waken at her coming. A moonbeam fell on his face, quiet in gentle slumber. They leaned above him, and Merope lifted her axe, preparing to strike, when the old servant, who stood closer to the couch and saw the boy's features most distinctly, suddenly gripped the queen's arm with a cry of amazement. "Stop! It is your son Aepytus you are about to kill." Merope's arms fell to her side. She put down the axe and threw herself over her son, whom she woke with her sobs. When they had clasped each other lovingly and long, her son told her that he had not come to deliver himself up to those plottings against him, but rather to punish them, to free her from a husband she despised, and with the help of the citizens whom he hoped to win over to his cause, to assume his father's scepter. After this, the three discussed the best means of taking revenge on wicked Peloponnesus. Merope donned mourning robes, went to the king, and told him she had just received the sad news that her only remaining son was dead, that from now on she was willing to live at peace with her husband and to forget the unhappy past. The tyrant walked right into the snare. He grew light of heart, since the heavy burden which had weighed upon him had miraculously removed, and declared he would make thanks offerings to the gods, because now he had no more enemies in all the world. He summoned the citizens to attend these rites in the marketplace, but they came reluctantly and with downcast eyes, for the common people had loved good Cresphones, and now mourned his son, whom they had regarded as their last hope. When the city was assembled, Aepytus himself fell on the king as he was making sacrifice, and stabbed him to the heart. Merope and her old servant swiftly proclaimed to the Messenes that the youth that they had thought a stranger, in reality was the rightful heir to the throne. At this, they broke into deafening shouts of jubilation, and that very day Aepytus occupied the throne of his father. Conducted by his mother, he entered the palace as king of Messene. His first action was to punish the murderers of his father and brothers, as well as all others implicated in the crime. But when the dead had been avenged, he proved so generous and so benevolent a ruler that he won over the nobles as well as the people of Messene. He was held in such esteem that his descendants were permitted to call themselves Aepytidae instead of Heraclidae. And here ends my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends, Enjoy the journey.